Get ready for some big names making big moves for big bucks. CJ, the NHL is ready for the biggest salary cap increase since pre-COVID, up potentially by $25.5 million over the next 3 seasons. No bigger name on our list of top 50 pending UFAs than right at the top, Mitch Marner. CJ, what are the odds that he re-signs with the Leafs? And if not Toronto, how many teams are realistic landing spots for him?
Well, Mitch Marner didn't come this far to go just this far, right? I mean, he refused any ability or attempts to negotiate with the Leafs in season, at least substantially, on a new contract extension. Obviously, didn't take management's request to waive his no movement clause. And so he did that because he wants to be a free agent in this summer. He wants to look at what the open market will yield out there for him. And I think it will be a massive payday for Mitch Marner. Not only is he coming off a 102-point season, the best in terms of points in his NHL career. But because, as you mentioned, Gino, there's more money out there in the system. It's very rare in the NHL, at least in recent years, that we've seen a player of this kind of stature go free on the market. I think it's extremely likely he'll at least take a peek at free agency, see what's out there for him, and make a decision that's best for him and his family. Now, he hasn't fully closed off a return to Toronto. Perhaps you could get sort of a Steven Stamkos 2016, timeline where he did look behind the curtain and still stayed with the Lightning at that point in time. But I think all signs point to Mitch Marner going free and, being up for grabs for all 32 teams on July 1st.
How many teams do you think realistically could be in the Marner sweepstakes?
Well, I'd start with at least 20 that are making phone calls and are going to be examining if there could be a fit there. Now, my understanding of what Mitch Marner wants from this process, obviously coming off his best season and with a rising cap, he's going to be looking for a raise. No surprise there. He's going to be looking to go to a place that, he's going to have a chance to win in the window that he's signing. So, not necessarily limited to just the top tier contenders of this moment, but teams that are headed in the right direction, I think, are going to be the sort of places he's looking at. And then obviously, like any player, he's going to want to go to the most attractive destinations. So that's why you're hearing, talk about Florida, about Vegas, some of the excellent weather, organizational, and tax markets that exist in the league. But, I think that the list goes beyond that because, what does a team like Colorado do, for example, after losing Mikko Rantanen? I would not be surprised at all if they're a team that ends up bidding for Mitch Marner. And so, I think it's a little premature to say it's only going to be these 3 or these 4 or these 5 teams, because I think part of this process for Marner as well is having a chance to imagine other opportunities, to maybe, look at some of the places that aren't maybe the more obvious destinations as well. And so, it's going to be a pretty compelling free agent pursuit, assuming that it does get there and that he hasn't signed an extension in the meantime.
Another Leaf, John Tavares, number 3 on our list of top 50 pending UFAs, but he made it sound like it was a done deal, CJ. He said he'd spoken to Leafs management and felt, quote, very optimistic, end quote, that he'll be back. But CJ, could this become more complicated than it appears on the surface?
Well, I think it's a very complicated situation. I mean, this is a player transitioning in his own career, right? When he arrived in Toronto 7 years ago, he was the NHL's marquee free agent at that time. He signed a big ticket contract. I think now the priority, certainly for John Tavares at this stage of his career, is to chase the Stanley Cup, and he believes there's no better place to do that than Toronto. But what does that contract look like? And, can he maybe take something that's a little below his present market value? Because let's not forget, Tavares is getting on in years. He's coming off a 38-goal season. He had 74 points this season. He's one of the most productive players of any of them that have the ability to hit the open market on July 1st. And so can they thread the needle between the Leafs and his agents in order to find something that both sides are comfortable with? Obviously, the Leafs will be looking for something appearing like a hometown discount just because they're going to have a lot of other, needs to fill. There's other holes in this lineup that I think management's going to want to pursue. But at the same time, pride is part of this and respect is part of this too. So yes, on the surface, there's every reason to believe Tavares will remain a Leaf because I think there's mutual interest on both sides in seeing that happen. But the devil's in the details and in that deal. And, that those conversations are set to start here in the very near future.
What about the Panthers? They're well on their way to making it back-to-back cups, and yet they got 3 guys in our top 11 on our list who could have a foot out the door. Sam Bennett, Aaron Ekblad, and Brad Marchand, of course, all pending UFAs. Run these guys down as most likely to return to wouldn't be surprised if he moved on at all?
I'd say most likely to return, I'm going to go with Sam Bennett. And, while there's certainly a lot of teams out there that are looking what he's doing just in these playoffs alone, but, he brings some intangibles that go beyond, what you measure in goals or point production. And I do believe he'd like to remain in Florida. And, if you look at the Panthers, they have lost free agents in the past. I mean, they lost 7 or 8 guys almost immediately after winning the Stanley Cup last spring, but they were largely players around the fringes. They've done a good job of maintaining their core talent, and I believe Sam Bennett fits that mold for the Panthers. Rather, pardon me, a little slip of the tongue. And so I think that he's the most likely, I'd say, to return. It's certainly not a guarantee by any means, because the other thing is Florida's comfortable, I think, letting players walk if that's where they get to, right? Aaron Ekblad has been a Panther his entire career since being a #1 overall pick. He's had a tough season in some ways. I think he's had to bounce back here in these playoffs since returning their lineup after missing 20 games for that suspension for the performance-enhancing substance he took during the season. But, they've also acquired Seth Jones. And so in some ways, it's optimal, of course, if you can keep Ekblad in that mix and Jones. But I do think they have a bit of a replacement on the right side should the contract ask and what they're desiring to pay him not meet themselves. And finally is Brad Marchand. And admittedly, this one is a little bit harder to handicap. He's a newer player there. He's fit in so seamlessly. Obviously, he wanted to be in Florida. That's one of the reasons the Bruins dealt him there at the deadline. But I think he's got a great chance to cash in this free agent period. I think that he'd be in really hot demand if he does hit the open market on July 1st. And so wouldn't surprise me if maybe he elects to go somewhere to have one big final payday at the end of this run. But, that being said, most players don't want to leave Florida, and I think the Panthers know that. So, there's a bit of a dynamic at play there, but certainly this team is probably going to lose talent as they have in previous years. What the Panthers do so well is find ways to replace it.
Would it be funny if the Leafs went a little Marchand fishing and threw out some cash to him? That'd be something. A couple of really interesting names on the Canadian clubs, numbers 4 and 5 on our list of UFAs. The Jets are trying to convince Nick Ehlers to stay in Winnipeg. The Canucks tried but failed to move Brock Besser. What are you hearing on those fronts, CJ?
Well, Besser, I would be very, very surprised if he was back in Vancouver. I think the expectation, it's been clear really since the deadline and when the season ended that he is going to move on, kind of a farewell feeling to his last game or two there with the Canucks. And so, this is a good marketplace for both of these players. There's not a deep free agent list. I mean, we've run 50 deep on the list you can find on TSN.ca, but, you'll find a pretty steep drop-off in terms of players that can make an immediate difference on teams, certainly at the top end of the roster. I think both of these guys can fit that role, certainly as top 6 forwards, wherever they wind up. And so, Besser isn't coming off his best season, but he does do something that's incredibly valuable, which is put the puck in the net. He's done that consistently throughout his NHL career. And so I expect him to hit the open market. A little less clear with Ehlers. I mean, I think ultimately for the Jets to keep him, they might have to extend beyond where their comfort zone is to pay him, just because of what I mentioned. The market dynamics suggest someone like him is going to have a fair number of opportunities out there. I think that there's a lot of other top teams in the league, of which Winnipeg is one, that are going to be looking for scoring help. And so whether that's, Montreal, Carolina, maybe an up-and-coming team like Chicago, go down the list. I mean, there's a lot of teams, I think, that will be in the market for dynamic playmaking forwards. And there aren't too many of them out there, especially if some of the names on this list end up signing in their current places before July 1st. So, let's revisit this in a few weeks, I'd say, with Ehlers. The Jet season has only recently ended. He went immediately over to the World Hockey Championship after that point. But, I think there's a desire for him to stay in Winnipeg on both sides of the table, but the deal has to make sense, and it's not yet clear if that's going to happen.
We'll keep updating this list as we get closer and closer to July 1st, and then, of course, beyond that as well. You can see the full list of the top 50 pending UFAs at tsn.ca.